My friend Lars Benson is the managing director at Insitor, an impact investment firm based in Singapore with investments across India, Pakistan, Cambodia, Myanmar. Insitor backs businesses that drive positive social impact in infrastructure, the environment, and entrepreneurship. Previously, Mr. Benson spent 2 decades working at the intersection of business, government, and civil society to advance policy and regulatory reforms across Africa. His work began in Angola as country director, supporting small and medium-sized enterprises serving the oil sector. He later led a private enterprise development program in Azerbaijan and contributed to numerous World Bank, USAID, and U.S. State Department initiatives in Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Throughout his career, Mr. Benson has championed international development efforts with a strong focus on supporting women-led businesses. He's advised a broad range of enterprises from micro-scale farmers in Nigeria to large-scale manufacturing exporters, emphasizing that women are essential to economic growth and transformation in emerging markets. He holds an MBA from the University of Maryland and a Bachelor of Arts from Tufts University. I proudly introduce Mr. Lars Benson.
So what they didn't mention is my most important claim to fame is that my wife's sister is the president of Rotary for Amelia in Italy. And so therefore that's clearly why I'm here today. And just to warm up, I was practicing when I was in Italy in Amelia in September for one of the Rotary events there. But I do have a long history with Rotary in the sense that I've never been a member, but I have had the opportunity and pleasure of speaking at Rotary in Kenya and Rotary in Uganda through the course of my career. So I'm gonna try to mix this up and make this interesting, especially because of the crowd that I have before me and listening to some of the conversations that was going on. It seems like most of you should be up here giving this speech and possibly not me. But let me tell you a story. We always want to start with a story about incredible women that truly changed the world. And this is a woman that I know and had the pleasure of working with. And then she used to say always nice things about my previous company. And some of you might even know her because she does live occasionally in Northern Virginia. So she started with a garment manufacturing company and started in terms of a family business. That quickly determined that, she needed to do more in terms of supporting women. And so then she opened up a bakery. And she was truly starting to get involved in this women economic empowerment. In 1997, she started a foundation because she wanted to give back to the people in her country. And at the same time, because of the power of advocacy, she got involved with the National Association of Businesswomen. And because of that is how she came into touch with my previous company called the Center for International Private Enterprise. And the whole purpose of the National Association of Businesswomen was to train Malawian women on leadership and advocacy and entrepreneurship. They provided training, networking, and several advocacy efforts. But that wasn't sufficient. She really wanted to focus on young women, so she got involved with the Young Women's Leader Network in terms of training the next generation of female change movers. Through all of this, she eventually got recruited to Parliament. She was working with us on a lot of the advocacy issues in her country. And from there, she became Minister of Gender. And there she became Minister of Foreign Affairs, Vice President. And then she became the second woman president in Malawi in Africa. And her name was Joyce Banda. She's helped over 1 million Malawians, women and children, through education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. Now, she's truly an inspiring woman, and I was involved with working her when she was both the minister and the president, but our organization helped support her women's association. So when we talk about women economic empowerment, why is there inequality in the need for women economic empowerment? And so, of course, going to give you a couple of stats and numbers because it makes it sound like I know what I'm talking about up here. World Bank says there's about 2.4 billion working age women that lack economic rights. There's 178 of 195. There are 195 countries in the world. I had to check that up again today, but there are 195 countries that essentially in the world, and 178 of them have put up legal barriers restricting women to economic participation. Those come from the World Bank. If we look at Global Citizen, women earn on average 20 to 30% less than men. And when we take a look at this as well and start looking at across the developing world, 60 to 90% of women are actually in the informal sector, which means that they lack job protections, they lack they have a lot of insecurity and a bunch of different issues. So I'm going to tell you another story about Salima Ahmed. She was the president of another woman we worked with, the Bangladesh Women Chamber of Commerce and Industry. She was a successful businesswoman in her own rights in the auto industry before she became involved with associations. And she was part and member of many, many different associations before she started this women's chamber with the Bangladesh Chamber. And that was partially because she, as a successful millionaire and woman, essentially needed her husband's signature to open a bank account in Bangladesh. And so what did she do? She clearly brought that up as her first issue, and we all thought that was a great thing to support. So we supported her Women's Business Association. And I've had the pleasure of working with her across Africa on various different associations, really, and she's an inspiring leader and speaker. But she's, in the end, supported over 7,000 women entrepreneurs, and essentially through training, business consulting, credit linkages, advocacy, and networking has made a difference. She helped pass a law, of course, that allowed women to open a bank account without their husbands or their sponsor's signature. So what does it really take to be a successful entrepreneur? And I really think that there's three things, and whether you're a man or woman, I think this pretty much holds true. The first thing is knowledge. Does the entrepreneur have the knowledge to deliver the product or service? Okay. And in terms of my new career in impact investing, we like to call this sort of the challenges and opportunities towards inclusive business investing. And those are really awareness, right? So is there awareness among the people who are these entrepreneurs trying to make a difference? And so when we take a look, one of the members at Rotary in the past has helped support, that's here, a local NGO here in Washington called Kids Connection Haiti. Really, they put out different stories, and since I'm married to one of the members of Kids Connection Haiti, if I don't do a plug, we're going to have trouble. I can't come home. But more importantly, it's a great organization, and I'm really happy that Rotary was able to support them. But Celine really she grew up in this system. So Kids Connection Haiti essentially supports orphans, and I would call them former slaves, children who are essentially between the ages of 18 and 25 and don't really have economic support to become productive members of society. So Kids Connection Haiti helped Celine learn how to become a seamstress. And so now what she does is she makes kids' uniforms, and then she, of course, sells those uniforms, but she also gives back to the community. So it's all about citizenship and good citizenship, right? So this is one example of sort of how knowledge is something which, again, is a challenge for a lot of, because of culture or religion or social pressures. A lot of people, and women specifically, do not have those different opportunities. Of course, then the second one is opportunity. Businesses must ensure that they have productive services and employment opportunities meet the needs of especially low income. So we talk about this in impact investing about accessibility, but it's really about opportunities. So again, one of the projects we were working on was called Business for Peace. And this was sort of what could we do about encouraging business to help solve insecurity around the world? And we picked one of the lovely areas called the Sahel. And while we were very impactful, we didn't really change the outcome in terms of what's happening in the Sahel today. But I had the pleasure of meeting Zainabu, who is making shea oil. And she was making shea oil in a village that was with women, that was essentially occupied by the extremists and the bad guys. And her market was in the capital. So she had to essentially find a way to transport her goods from where the goods were produced to the capital. And along the way, she would encounter problems that we typically don't have. She would have either the military people or the jihadis who would stop her and ask her for bribes. And she would have to pay bribes to get her goods to go through the border. And so what we ended up doing was working with Zainabu and essentially giving her access to the president, where they started to talk about all of these challenges that small entrepreneurs were having in terms of different parts of Mali and getting their goods to market. And we were able to help arrange to reduce the level of insecurity by essentially having this access, eventually the president's office, not really the president, but the president's office in terms of telling about all of these different stories. So then what ended up happening in the end were the military was forced to actually accompany all of these small traders from these remote villages and secure their goods. They were held responsible for whether the goods arrived or didn't arrive. So what we were able to do through the business associations in Mali, at the very grassroots level up to the very top, was essentially take away some of these transport problems that allowed Zainabu access to market, but also to pursue this opportunity as well. And I tell that story because I think in the end, those are important stories to tell, because while Mali and Niger and a lot of and Chad and Burkina Faso are facing all sorts of challenges today, if we're able to sort of make a difference in terms of some of these small traders in terms of their ability to access markets and access finance, well, this trickles down to meaning jobs. It means that there's less incentive in terms of insecurity. It gives women that are these business leaders empowerment, and it allows women to be successful in business in essentially an area that most of us would run away and try to find something else to do as quickly as possible. And so now we get to sort of my new phase of my career, which is on one of the biggest and the third challenge, which is really about access to finance, right? So when we take a look at this, there's a finance gap between 1.7 and $1.9 trillion today for small businesses, and most of this affecting women. And when we talk about what low income truly means, we run the risk of 100 million more people in the next 10 years, essentially coming and being categorized as poor or extremely poor. Now, we know that there is a movement here in the United States and a change in terms of what we're doing politically, in terms of providing assistance and aid. We heard a story of my colleague over there at CARE that does a lot of wonderful things in the world. But one of the things that you need to do is you need to find, in the end, market solutions to essentially, as much as possible, this whole issue around poverty. And this has been around since the 50s. And if you want to talk about impact investing or all of these different types of things through philanthropy or through organizations like Rotary giving grants, or through nonprofits or USAID or all of the rest, but also private individuals and governments involved in terms of financing the business of providing goods and services to the poor that provides a social and environmental impact. And so, of course, now I'm going to plug my current firm. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing good service. So Insitor is an impact investment company. And so far, they've been around since 2009. We've affected about 70 million consumers, right? 78 million to be exact. We have about 60% of these are women. In terms of the types of companies that we're supporting, we are currently in 4 countries: India, Pakistan, Myanmar, and Cambodia, and Thailand. And 90% of the people that we affect are low income. And by low income, we define that as less than $6.50 a day. Okay. So when you take a look, and what do we do? Well, Insitor, I've just recently joined them, so I can't claim credit, but they really are focused on 2 things: social and environmental impacts, as well as financial impacts. So we at least guarantee market rates for essentially the investors that we have, that are private individuals as well as governments, in terms of the current investors. Now, a couple of the companies we invest in are an organization called Goldfin. Goldfin has a really interesting idea, and it is a little bit controversial, but it's a really interesting idea. So you have countries like in Pakistan where when women get married, they are given a dowry, usually in the form of gold. And I know they do this also in Turkey, because I was at a wedding where I had to give gold, and I was like scratching my head going, this is very strange. But we gave, so they have this gold, which typically sits under the mattress and does nothing. It does something. It's insurance. But what it doesn't do is actually create economic opportunity, or you can't put the gold to work like you could doing other things. So Goldfin is essentially a company that has set up an interesting model where, sure, they take the gold in and they allow and give loans to the women to provide education for their children, to provide for funerals, to provide for starting a new business, and all of the rest. And they are guaranteed, as long as they pay back, and they have about a 95% payback rate, because women, as some of you all know, are the best people to lend money to. But then they are putting this money to use and giving opportunities to do that. Work India is essentially a company that's really interesting. It's taken the internet and essentially is providing services to low-income people. So it's not like the rest of us, some of us who are looking for jobs, in terms of going out there and going to whatever website we're using or LinkedIn. Essentially, this is filtering companies and providing HR services for informal companies in India and across India. We have Butterfly that is doing, really started the first privately run autistic schools in India. The one that everybody tells me to talk about is K-Wash. K-Wash is essentially providing in Cambodia access to water for many, many different households. And why is this important? Well, it's important because what they learned was women were the ones who had to go to the well to essentially get the water. Women were the ones that faced insecurity when they did that. This took away other things that women could have been doing in terms of productive economy, because they had no access to water. So what K-Wash has done is essentially come in and been able to provide water to a whole bunch of households. And then we have 2 others, Farmly and Azela, which are involved in terms of agribusiness, which is another big area where we find a lot of women workers. And they're essentially supporting women both in terms of finance, but also in terms of supply. So giving them inputs that they're able to produce their things. So as looking at the time here, before we get to questions, I'm going to wrap up very soon. But conclusion on why women in terms of women economic empowerment. And we have to really think about a bunch of different things. What are the economic development outcomes we are looking for? Not the outputs, not how many women, but what are the outcomes we want to change in terms of society? We need to think about the peace and security angle of essentially supporting and investing in women to be successful. We need to think about healthy communities So I spent a lot of time working on anti-corruption across Africa, especially as it relates to business. And that's a whole new story. Maybe I'll get invited back to tell you great stories about that one. But healthy communities is one of the things that we typically see, is that women, for some reason, seem to be more concerned than fathers in terms of essentially trying to make sure that their kids are well fed and go to school. And so what we find is, if we're able to invest in women as well, we find that the communities are generally better served in terms of health outcomes. And then finally, economic opportunities. So it is smart to invest in women. At Insitor, why do we have such a good statistic around women? Because we know that investing in women means that the financial services companies, they're going to get paid back. And it's also, because of the challenges around, it's something that we need to affect. And so what can Rotary and other clubs and groups do about it? Well, you're already doing quite a bit from what I hear and from what I see. But it's really about partnerships, reaching out to other organizations, NGOs that are working in this space. And I have a long list of small NGOs to really great big NGOs that are doing fabulous work in creating outcomes. It's really about what Rotary is all about, which is networking, right? Because one of the biggest challenges facing women in terms of being successful in different communities around the world, it's about networking. Of course, there are the grants, and I recently heard about how big the Rotary contribution is in terms of on a yearly basis. Finally, there's advocacy. There are things that we can do as individuals, but things that a powerful group like Rotary, being international as well, can play a very important role in terms of not necessarily taking the lead at times if it doesn't make sense, but working with other organizations around advocacy. How do we change the environment? And if we think about what it would take for women entrepreneurs to truly be successful, we need to work through three different things. And we need to work on this collectively and individually. And if we think back to Joyce Banda and Zainabu and some of the stories that I told you about, it's really, we have to first work with that entrepreneur, that woman, about the mindset. And do they have the knowledge that they need to be successful? And that's in general, in terms of what a lot of people do, in terms of the training and technical assistance. There's a lot of groups out there that do these types of things. The next level that we need to start thinking about is networking. And the Rotary is, in terms of who you are and the voice you have, you will play an extremely important role in terms of allowing that, and also thinking about, you're all successful business people here, thinking about how can you network? How can you support, even in the Washington area, women-owned businesses in terms of doing that? And that's one of the things that we try to do, supporting women chapters and women chambers in terms of different associations. And making sure that we're counting the right things in terms of all of that. And then finally, the most important thing in terms of what we could possibly do is really to change the ecosystem. If you have 178 of 195 countries around the world that do not have equal laws, then we do need to change in terms of ensuring equal pay and that there is no glass ceiling. But at the same time, we have to, it's not just about that. It's about the ability of women to own a bank account. It's about the ability of women to have assets, to get loans. How do we take a look at that environment of that ecosystem, that fish tank, to make that the water is clean enough for all the women swimming in that pond, for others? And so SIPE in general, in terms of what I used to do across Africa, is we would work in local communities about trying to make a change for the small businesses there, with a specific focus around women, and getting them organized so that they actually had a voice. To answer the question quickly, Insitor has $109 million under assets under management, which makes it quite large. We have family foundations and what they call development finance institutions. We have 3 of them currently that have provided that. We're starting a new fund starting a new fund to raise for a new fund next year, and we're trying to go for a raise of about $150 million. In terms of the time, The average is 7 years. Okay. You are looking to be able to talk about social and environmental impacts, of which I'm not going to get into this finance question. And I mentioned some of them. But in terms of the finance, what everybody tries to guarantee, and very few impact firms actually do, is to give you market rates, right? So if we talk about market rates, we're talking about 5% currently in terms of market rates. Insitor does better than that. And they do better than that. Why? Because when they started, part of their philosophy was they have to have a return on investment in terms of making sense, in terms of why they're into this business. There are a lot of firms that do impact investment, a lot of them here based in the United States, and Insitor is not one that, now that I'm around, we're going to hear more about it, but hasn't been really working the United States. They've been working quite a bit in Europe in terms of fundraising. But importantly around that, what they are doing is they're investing in financial services company, microloans, microlending. So they're minimizing some of the risk that associated with that. They're looking for high asset net worths in terms of the company. So we invest in real estate company, which clearly has assets, which if they are do go belly up, we can get, we'll get as an owner. In terms of equity versus loans, well, of course, the financial services, most of that is lending. We are essentially lending to microfinance companies. They have about 29 active investments. They have screened about 700 different companies until now in terms of all of this. And the average investment size is typically between 2 to 5 million, as they are early seed, as they say, all the way up to Series A in terms of some of those investments. Okay, back up there.
Thank you. I'm really interested in how you approach this problem differently in countries based on the strength of the social safety net, and especially impacting women, healthcare, childcare. Like often you need, in a country like this one, you often need to work to have money to pay for childcare so that you have time to work and do other entrepreneurial activities or to purchase healthcare, et cetera. And I'm curious if you've seen success differ in different models of, providing services, and kind of what the long-term success looks like based on how much support someone was able to receive younger.
Good. That's a 45-minute answer to that question, but I'll try to make it really, really short. Social services in the developing world don't really exist. You have essentially, as you do for financing, you have one, family. Now, unlike here in the United States, families are usually very extended and they usually are very supportive in terms of that. But however, when it comes to specifically to women, what the various studies show is raising families, or in families that are typically in Africa, 4 to 7 kids, means that a long part of a woman's, when it comes to, again, the social services, one of the problems we have and what we would always work on is taxes, all right? When you're talking about a lot of these countries, especially across Africa, not only do they not get enough in terms of taxes, they then spend it poorly if we talk about accountability and transparency. And so that causes problems. And if we take a look at countries like Kenya, you would have 10% of the essentially people paying 90% of the taxes. And so everybody sort of has to pay for their own if what we want out of government is education, health, security, in terms of, what the real purpose of government is really all about. And so when we take a look at why companies and how companies like Insitor would approach this and why they invested in certain companies that are providing insurance type products, is because this should be a private sector solution to a public sector type problem. The amount of time it takes for government to mobilize and to react is not going to be, has proven not to be sufficient in terms of raising the standards in most of the developing world. And so if you don't have that, then what you need to do is try to find private sector solutions, everything from How do you provide ambulance services to insurance type products? Because insurance type products are rare across Africa and very unaffordable for low income type people. And so if you're able to get in and find a way to do that, then you have a wonderful opportunity.
It's bouncing around my head, but basically I remember when I went to Uganda, the role of women was very, very different than I'm used to. You know, the women did not sit down for business. There were multiple wives. And so it's like when you have somebody coming in from the outside with their own value set, saying this is what you should be doing, women should be here, and all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of leeriness when, you know, people in that country are responding to you as an outsider, telling them what their country should be like, telling them what the role of women should be. So I was really surprised that you didn't really talk much about navigating the cultural differences, because I distinctly remember having a conversation with people from multiple countries in Africa saying, you know, what do you think about the Chinese investing in your country? They're like, look, the Chinese come in, they do what they're going to do. There are clear terms. When you get involved in the United States, they have all kinds of human rights strings attached. And we don't like dealing with that because they make us do things that our country is not always ready for. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, you didn't talk at all about navigating the culture. Maybe it's because we didn't have enough time, but like, talk about that, please.
Okay, it's a very big and important point, and it also, you're raising something that we always tried to avoid, is in terms of what used to be international development. And that was, it should not be somebody like me. I'm up here talking about women economic empowerment, or I was going around talking with everybody from heads of state to ministers to small street vendors about policy, right? And laws and the rule of law. And so I can't go and pretend that I'm going to go into Uganda or Kenya or Zimbabwe or Sudan, especially Sudan, and really talk about sort of things that we would not necessarily find perhaps acceptable, from human rights to other types of things. That was not what my job was. My job was to go there and listen to what people were telling me about what they wanted, and to help them in a process, which is generally described as advocacy, to make a change. And whether we're talking about women in Pakistan or Bangladesh getting access to a loan, or we're talking about women in Nigeria that can't go into a bank and get a loan, how do we create a network of women lending to women to be successful, to prove an economic model? Or how do we create a daycare type system for women in Kenya, in a small underprivileged community, in terms of being able to go to work, to run a hair salon, or to mentor other women? It's about organization here, right? It's not about coming in on a high horse and talking to people about their culture, religion, or whatever. We have to be very, very sensitive to do anything like that. And you wouldn't cross a line. However, what we can do in Uganda was work with a whole bunch of set up entrepreneurship clubs in several universities, working with the Rotary Club in terms of bringing in guest speakers and entrepreneurs, setting up internships, which nobody's ever heard of in Uganda until we showed up, which is kind of strange. And then you would essentially find ways to introduce women and people to different communities. When we went to an area that was an oil producing area, right? What did we end up doing culturally? We were talking about corruption.
Well, this is just an example of the caliber of folks we have in this club. Maybe we should think about giving more time to go back and forth with questions. You're going to get a tree put in your name, planted in your name. Yeah, down near the tidal basin. And in respect to time, I'm going to sort of run this through you quickly.